What's going on, everybody? It's Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence. And before we begin the show, I want to tell you about the Hero program we're doing for our first responders and a few other folks out there. And basically, it's a grant. 2.5% to 3% of the purchase price can go for eligible borrowers, and that could be used as a down payment. It could be used to pay your closing costs. It is an FHA program. It can be used for FHA products as well, and it can be used for one-time close program. Couple of things you want to know about the DPA Advantage. It allows you to have a grant, so it's free money, 3.5% or 2%, depending on what your situation is. It may be continued up to 6% seller concession for closing costs. There is no resale or borrow repayment programs. You need a minimum FICO of 620. And just so you know, it's not just for firefighters, policemen. It is for teachers, educators, medical personnel, doctors, nurses. It is also if you're a civil servant with the federal, state, or any local municipality, and military personnel. Give me a call if you want more information about that, 602-299-9357 or www.clarencefergusonhomes.com.
If you're over 40 and want to be the best version of yourself, Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence is here to help. Clarence Ferguson is a seasoned loan officer, fitness expert, personal chef, and entrepreneur who leads a revolution of men and women who want to live their best life going into middle age. Inspiring dialogue, challenging topics, and industry leaders are here offering tips and how-tos to improve your life. Now, here's Coach Clarence.
What's going on? I got a special guest in the building, and this is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to move away from some of the things I normally talk about. As you guys know, I was in hip-hop for a long time. Still am, still making beats and messing around with the DJ stuff every blue moon. And so I got my buddy in here, John Dunlap, and he's one of the few people that I talk hip-hop with because he's not confused. He's not part of this new generation. He can give you some real perspective on hip-hop. What's going on, John?
Hey, what's up, C. Ferg, man? How you doing today?
I am good.
Man, you got me way up here, man. You way up north hiding out, man.
I know. That's where. Well, it's about to be up south soon, too. So
Okay.
Hopefully Brian gets everything going real quick. So we're going to be moving. So,
All right, good.
So I'm excited about this conversation because we both have kind of similar history in hip hop. And, you know, I want to kind of talk about your background a little bit and what was attractive to you about hip hop.
All right, good question. So I grew up in Flagstaff, so people wouldn't even expect any kind of hip hop, anything in Flagstaff. You know, people would be like, what, are you serious? But if you lived there and you grew up around the time that I did, I think like anywhere in the country was influenced by such a movement, you know, and
Sure.
the way that it spread, like, hip-hop is worldwide now.
Absolutely.
And so it kind of hit Flagstaff, and it was just the thing, you know, of my generation. I'm like, okay, this is my music, this is my culture. It wasn't my parents' thing. So I totally latched on to it. I remember guys in my neighborhood, they would have the big boom box that had the big, double D batteries. Yeah, they had like 10 of them. Mm-hmm. So they'd be using those. They'd be at the park playing basketball, and you'd always hear the music coming out. So I'd be young, probably like 8, 9, you know, just probably wishing they would even let me get on the court. You know, all I could do is probably shoot shots. There was no way I could drive inside.
Right, you couldn't drive.
So I was just sitting there absorbing the scene, just hoping they would let me play. But I just remember the music all the time. So I started getting into it more and more. And you know, I didn't have like the money to buy tapes. It was all about buying tapes back then.
Sure.
And my dad, he would be like, well, if you shovel the snow, you know, we had snow up in Flag. So if you shovel the snow, I'll go buy you a tape. So, you know, we'd get a lot of storms. It was like, okay, this is a chance for me to go get another tape because I'm shoveling his car out. So we go to, used to be called like Circles Records. Or,
yeah, I remember Circles.
Yeah, we had a Circles.
Yeah.
And so we had a Circles up there. So we go to Circles and he'd buy me, you know, a tape or whatever. But I remember, I want to say it was the movie Beat Street.
Yep.
And it was like 84, I remember. And I don't even know how I went because I remember being there by myself. I don't know if I snuck out and went or whatever. But Melly Mel had a rap at the end of Beat Street. And I remember just being blown away. Just being blown away by the rap. And I remember he was talking about computers and the end of the world and, you know, just crazy deep stuff.
Yeah,
you know, as a young child, I was blown away, right? So I remember leaving out of the theater thinking like, okay, this is something I'm going to be down with for as long as it's going. And in those days, people would be discouraging you. They're like, well, it's just a fad, it's disco, it's going in. So I would be real offended. So I felt like for a long time I had to defend it. Even like going to school, we had a kind of like your cliquish type 80s high school where you had the jocks, the nerds, the preps, the hip hop kids, the gangster kids. Right. You had all these different elements, but then you had kids who were probably like rock and heavy metal and they were, oh, rap sucks.
Right.
It's not like now where like everybody's rap music, but back then you had your genres, almost like you had to defend it. So I think for me, I've always kind of felt like this is mine because we had to defend it like that. So that's kind of how I got really into it in those days.
Well, that's funny you had mentioned rock, because when I started DJing, I would play rock records to get those kids who like that, and then we would just rap over the beats. And obviously, about break beats.
Right.
We find a part where they would break it down, and then you would sample that over and over with the turntables and rap over the beats. So you mentioned Beat Street, and Melly Mel is obviously one of my favorite rappers. Like a lot of these rappers now don't even know who that is. They're like, who's Melly Mel?
Right.
Like, who's the Furious Five? Like,
right.
These guys are like, to us, heroes. What do you think of the current state of hip hop now?
Like, I never really wanted to be that hater person, because I remember there was that kind of person when I was younger, and they would hate on it, and they would, even people who were maybe a little bit earlier in hip hop than we were, they kind of hated what was new. So I never wanted to grow up and be that kind of hater person. But I think because we come from an era and we defend it because we felt it was so good, I think when we see it nowadays, there's always going to be this comparison. Like, this person's not as good, this person's not as talented, they're whack. There's always this comparison factor, but I always kind of wanted to take it for what it was, like be open-minded and listen to it. Now, it might not be something that I'm playing on a regular basis or bumping, but I can take it for what it is and give it its fair shake and listen to it. And there's some new stuff that I do listen to.
Yeah.
I think there was a Migos song recently I found myself playing it, and I was like, normally I wouldn't even play it, but if it moves you, it moves you.
Right.
No matter what the genre is or what era it is, even going back to find older music that may not even be from my generation. If I feel it, I'm going to like it. So I always want to be open-minded to it and not be that judgmental person that, like I said, I swore I wouldn't be. But there'd be some stuff sometimes, man, I'd be like, are you kidding me?
Well, we grew up. What I think the most interesting part about hip-hop is everyone had to have a lane. Like, you had a Slick Rick.
Right.
You had the groups, the Fat Boys. I mean, everybody had a lane. Run DMC, Now it's like everybody just does the same thing. They're just recycling the same stuff. And like you said, there's some good stuff. And sometimes I'm like, and then other times I'm like, wow, he just said that is. I mean, you got to rock him, Big Daddy Kane.
Right.
These super lyricists. And then some of these guys, I just listen to the lyrics. I'm like, man, they're not even trying to be different, not even trying to stand out. But also the game is different now, because back then you had to get a record deal, where now you could just put your own stuff out and sell it on the internet. You could become a star overnight on the internet,
And that's one thing, I was looking at some of the female rappers and just kind of how overtly sexual some of their stuff is. And, I really didn't want to be as judgmental, because I can definitely go back and see some of the music we listened to was vulgar, if not a little bit more. You had some of the stuff 2 Live Crew was putting out. Yeah. Some of the stuff NWA was putting out had some vulgar overtones to it. Even I forget the one Nate Dogg song. Everybody sings it.
Everybody sings it.
When I met you last night, once you hear that part, everybody sings it, and it's such a vulgar song.
Right.
So I never want to just be so judgmental, because I can say, it was kind of like that when we were coming up. But like you said, everybody had a lane. So if I wanted that particular type of music and I might have been in the mood for it, I could have it. But then I could have some party, playful, Fresh Prince, Kid and Play type stuff, or I could have some KRS-One, deep social issue rap, or I could have the swagged out Big Daddy Kane, Slick Rick type of stuff. So it was, your mood could fit what you wanted, where now it's like we're just spoon-fed kind of what's thrown out there, and there's no options.
Yeah, everything is it's very repetitive. That's the struggle I have with it. But there's a couple cats I like, the new guys that are out there doing it. But for the most part, most time just like, I try to find different things to entertain me, But hip hop has changed a lot. I think now it's a lot easier to do stuff, because back when I was doing my thing, like, we would sit down and have writing sessions. Like, I remember when Cube was doing Gangster Gangster, I watched him put that, like, it was so much thought into those lyrics, and then they'd run it by each other. Now it's just like, dudes will just say anything. Like they call them mumble raps. There's actually a song I do like, and it's called Mumble Rap. I can't remember this guy's name, but I actually like the song. But I just think you had to really stand out and be different. But now, like I said, anybody can be in hip hop, and I don't know if that's good for the culture or not. We'll see how it goes, because now, rappers are making money. When we rapped like years ago, we were just trying to get girls. We didn't even think about this could be a career. It was just like, if you could rap or to battle somebody at the quad at South Mountain, then you were cool, Now, like, guys are making millions of dollars. They get endorsement deals. It's a real business, So I think that's cool, definitely. So one thing that I noticed, too, is in hip-hop, it's influenced sports. It's influenced car manufacturers, commercials. What have you seen, like, in terms of when you were growing up, how hip-hop affected the culture and became mainstream?
That's a good question. And even you talk about Cube. We didn't have social media and access to media like you do now.
Right.
It was a big... to me, I felt like hip-hop was like a precious thing to have. Like, we only got MTV Raps for 30 minutes to an hour a day. So I remember putting in a VHS tape and making sure I had to time it and record it. And whoever had the best VHS tapes, like, oh, man, he got all the videos, so you could replay them and watch them, where now with YouTube, you just have access to it, and it's not as precious as it once was. Mm-hmm. So you remember somebody like Cube, we saw him a certain way, and maybe if there was social media in those days, we would have saw him differently. But it was, okay, Cube, gangster. And I'm like, oh, wow. But then as time goes on, I start seeing him playing the dad and the cop. And I'm sitting there like, not this dude that I thought a certain way of, in my teenage years. I remember we ditched school to get the NWA Straight Outta Compton on album, on vinyl.
On vinyl, yeah.
Ditched school, went and listened to it, was just blown away. It's like, whoa, and then to see his evolution. I think once I started seeing it be commercialized and being a lot of commercials during that time, I was just kind of like, oh man, I could just kind of sense it was maybe a path from a purity point that I didn't like it going, but I get it, it's money. Everything has to generate money. Absolutely. So once it started being in commercials and advertisements, and then you have the little corny jingles. I always remember MC Hammer had so many endorsements. I think he had like Taco Bell, Pepsi, some clothing lines. I think he even had a doll. So once you saw Hammer's success, I was like, this stuff is out of control.
Yeah. Everybody was taking advantage of it, sure. You had mentioned cassettes earlier, and I remember us being in California, they would have the mix show, and the mix show would come on in the middle of the night. The overnight DJ would do the mix show, and we'd have stacks of cassettes, and that's how you recorded stuff back then. You would push, I don't even know if they even do that anymore, but you put a cassette in, and you would just play right off the radio, and you would have mixes going on. So that's how you would hear hip-hop, because there was a few, and then you would hear the new people on the mixtape, which evolved into mixtapes, obviously, DJs going in. So what's going on with your life now? Are you a parent? What are you doing these days?
Parent. I've worked in education, ever since I moved down here. So I did work in high school for about 7 years. I was working at Chandler High School, teaching there.
What did you teach?
I was doing like study hall classes and like stuff with PE and coaching. And so it was interesting. I was young when I first started there. I think I was like 23. I got sent to the office the first day I worked there. They took me to the office like I was trespassing. I was like, no, I work here. So sometimes they'd be like, who's this new student? But, as a teacher, I didn't necessarily dress all shirt and tie, button up. It's hot down here, so right, I was trying to be as comfortable as I could. They didn't really have a dress code, but it was funny because you were getting a lot of kids. They were listening to their hip hop of their time frame, and being the type of person that I am, I remember just kind of being that one teacher that would hold them accountable. I was like Puffy. Remember Puffy making the band when he had them go walk and get cheesecake? So you would have these kids and they'd show up with a Run DMC T-shirt, right? Yeah. So automatically I'm going to look at them and I'll be like, okay, you got to at least name me 3 Run DMC songs. Right. And they get up there and be like,
young people with Led Zeppelin. I'm like, pick a song. Like, you don't even know who that is.
Right, Iron Maiden. And
right,
it's like, really?
Right. That's your mom's shirt.
So they would have it on. I'd be like, name me at least 3 songs. And they couldn't, and I would be upset. I'd be like, you're not hip hop. You need to take that shirt off. I took one kid to the office one time and made him change his shirt because of it. But I mean, it's like I said, I think our generation will defend it a little bit more because of probably what we had to go through. And the fact that it wasn't mainstream. Right. It's like we had to fight to get anything in it. We had to fight to even just have a little bit of access to it,
Yeah. I remember playing, I think it was My Philosophy And you know how positive Karis one was at that point. Like, my mom was like, turn that garbage off. It's horrible. And that's just a trend. You need to go to school. Now I'm like, remember you told me that? Look at it now. But it was the same. I'm sure when, like, Elvis was a big deal, right? The people were like, oh, he's so crazy. He's out there twerking. That was like twerking back then.
Right.
And people were like, that's the devil's music. And then now he's like, he's the biggest thing going, you know. So you mentioned you have children. How many children do you have?
I have 2 boys.
2 boys.
10 and 8.
What's that like?
It's interesting because I'm just kind of waiting for them to kind of gravitate to something that I was into, because obviously my music tastes come from my dad. Mm-hmm. My dad had tons of records, and as a kid, I wasn't even playing with toys so much. I always was in his albums, you know, and I think one time I scratched the album one time. I had to wait till like 6 o'clock for him to come on. I knew I was going to get a whooping. I had to delay that whooping for like 6 hours, you know, but it was because I always wanted to be in his records. So I'm kind of waiting on that stage for them to gravitate to something that I was into, whether it's sports or whether it's music or something. Now, if it's definitely music, you know, that'll be right up my alley to be like, okay, check this out. But, you know, I don't want to be somebody that judges them for whatever they're into. So I've kind of like played it chill. You know, my son is really into cars and Legos and building stuff. So sometimes my oldest is 10, and he's the one that's really into that. So for him to, you know, to just let them be a kid and let them get what they're into, you know, and try to support them as much as they can. Like I said, if he does pick up music and he wants to be in hip hop and rap, you know, I'm going to support him as much as I can, whatever path that he goes down.
Gotcha. Being a parent, so my son, I had him when I was 19, so we kind of grew up kind of in the same way. Like, he was going through the same stuff I was going through, so him going into music, he did music for a little while, but it just wasn't his thing. You know, he did it for a little while. He was rapping. He's actually pretty good. I wished he would have stuck with it, but he got burnt out on it. You know, it's different, like, raising a kid, especially a son, and you're watching, you're trying to protect him from all the mistakes you made, and you're just going, all right, hopefully he doesn't do it. I don't want to be that overbearing parent, but I also want to just let him make his own mistakes, you know. That's kind of an interesting thing that you said you kind of want to see what they do. What do you feel like they're into right now? Who do they listen to as far as music? Just whatever's on the radio? It's
funny because I remember my son was like liking Bruno Mars.
Oh,
you know,
like,
and for me, right, you know me, I'm like, okay, come on, you know. But I just think, you know, I don't know, he's not exposed to maybe some of the things that I was exposed to. These kids nowadays, they kind of live in like a bubble world, you know, especially now with the pandemic, you know, they've been inside. But even before that, these kids are so attached to tablets and computers and being and stuff like that, where I might have been playing basketball and exposed to the music and the dudes carrying a boombox and things like that, where they're more technology based, you know, so I don't know what point, you know, it'll change to be more teenage type stuff, but he's kind of on that cusp of girls a little bit and toys. He's at that age, you know, so where the girls are probably a little faster at his school, and he's like, I just want to play with my Legos, but here these girls are bothering me. So, hey, I wanted to say something about the tapes again. I used to get so many cassette tapes. I had cassette tapes after cassette tapes, and I used to start DJing parties because I had so many. Everybody knew I had all the music. So you used to have to set the tape on the song that you wanted, right? So I would set so many. So I would have like a preset of so many like tapes, but then you'd always get that person that would want to hear that song over.
And you're like,
so you're like, now the good thing is if it was the first song on the cassette, you could rewind it to the beginning. But if it wasn't, you'd have a problem. So sometimes it'd be like, I have to bring a Walkman or a spare little cassette tape to try to find it.
For young people, we had Walkmans. They play cassette tapes.
So the struggle to even DJ like that. And I remember, you know, I kept these cassettes forever. Even if after I stopped listening to cassettes, I just had them. I didn't want to give it up.
Yeah.
And then right before I got married, you know, me and my wife were moving in together, and I had this huge box of tapes, and I just had to dump them in the trash.
Wow.
And it was like,
was that like hard to do?
Somebody got a collection of some classic cassette tapes. So whoever's out there that found that huge box of just cassettes, you know, that was me.
What was it like when the CDs came on the scene? Was that, because like there's always these cliques of people like who think DJs now aren't real DJs because they aren't really spinning, because like I got software at home, I don't have to really even think, it will sync the music up, like where when you were a traditional DJ you had to spin. So like the problem you had with the cassettes where CD, you could pinpoint a point in the song and just like spin it right back. Like someone said play that song, you could just hit rewind and boom, it's there.
Right. I think I really like how it's set up now. It's a lot easier, and you don't have to carry as much equipment as you used to have to. That was a hassle. Then, some of my friends would be lazy and they didn't want to help, but they'd want to cut the profit. Like, but you wouldn't even carry the crates.
You wouldn't carry the crates. Yeah, right. I remember carrying crates. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Be back with John Dunlap.
Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence will be back right after this. Women all over come to Savvy to style their lives. From the way they look and how they feel, to the way they serve and empower others, to how they design their day. They do it all with Savvy, and you can too. We empower the artist in everyone. We believe you are the designer of your life, the author of your reality, the creator of your world. And we provide you with a way to style a life you truly desire. One of beauty, passion, community, and impact. So whether you shop our store and experience our style, or join our community of savvypreneurs who are on a mission to bring together and empower people around the globe, we welcome you. Now get your style on. Offering 3 types of style: fit, luxe, and everyday. Savvy. We empower you to style your world. The way you look, the way you work, the life you create for you and your family, and the people you create it with. Go to savvy.com/coachCEE. That's SAVVI.com/coachCEE. And when you check out, use the code COACHCEE. And now back to Fit Over 40. Here's your host, Coach Clarence.
All right, we're back in the studio, Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence and my guest, John Dunlap. We're just reminiscing about AZ hip-hop in general. And we have a mutual friend who actually introduced us, Tori Taylor. Shout out to Tori if he's listening. He got married. When did he get married? A year or so ago, whatever?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. And I actually saw he was here in town, but I couldn't meet up with him because it was like the last minute. I'm like, you got to give me better heads up than that. Tell me how you and Tori connected.
Well, Tori and my brother were really good friends, and Tori was still going to NAU at the time around my freshman year. And if you know Tori, a big guy in his presence, he'd wear like these Army combat boots with his pants tucked in, and he'd wear like a dog chain. And he would be the type of dude, if he saw you, right. And that's the funny thing. When DMX passed, the first person I thought about was Tori.
Yeah.
So Tori would be on campus and he'd grab you and like shake you. Where you going? That Tori type stuff. What you doing? Where you going? It's like, I got science class over here. And he'd hold you up. You'd be late for class. But Tori, he was the bouncer at a club up there. There was a club called Fiddlesticks. And, most people who were over the age of 21 and could drink would go there. But they would have after hours for the people who were between 18 and 21, which was a lot of the college students' age. And just any kind of hip hop culture or anything to have a club like that, like I would lay out my clothes and I would sleep and set the alarm for like 11:30, get dressed just to be there for those 2 hours because it was from 1 to 3. So bars at those days closed at 1 until 3. And Tori was the bouncer there, and so I remember he was still bouncing at Fiddlesticks, and then he started his own club called The Proof. And The Proof was like, so you got to imagine, so everybody's like, oh, wow, Tori's got this club called The Proof. And he was running it out of like, I want to say maybe in like a hotel lobby that, I don't know, knowing Tori finagled somebody.
But see, that's whole hip hop, because you would rent a hotel lobby wherever they would, and that's how people used to throw parties, yeah.
Right, so he started having this club at The Proof, and everybody from Fiddlesticks, where he was bouncing at, started going to The Proof. But it was more of your hardcore hip-hop type crowd, where Fiddlesticks was a little more catered to everybody. But Fiddlesticks was that hip-hop crowd, and the DJ played straight hip-hop, and it was just that kind of audience. And it only lasted for about 2 months. I think it was just kind of too much, especially for a place like Flagstaff in them days. I'm like, what happened to The Proof? And he wouldn't go into too much of it, but, that short period of time, it was something that Tori had. But I remember, I wanted to start throwing a lot more house parties. But, as the culture at the time, you had the movie House Party. Yep. So we were going to emulate, like, okay, we're going to throw a party, and I would DJ and invite everybody in the neighborhood, and we'd be in somebody's basement, somebody's backyard, wherever we could throw a party, we would do it. Even I think there was one movie where they started having these pajama jams. I remember some of the guys at the campus would start throwing those. So we kind of did a lot of what we saw. But Tory was kind of an inspiration for a lot of that stuff. And I guess we said earlier, DMX passed, and that was kind of like his player.
And he, like you said, you couldn't miss him. He's the nicest guy in the world, but if you didn't know him, you would be nervous because he was such a big dude. And he would see you and start barking.
Right.
Like we used to call it, like he was our first DMX. He would be like, come over here. And then we would do shots on our birthday, which I still kind of miss, but he would bring over, we and him both like Crown Royal. So he would bring over the Crown Royal, and then we'd do, I think something you must have did up there. You would hit the glass on the floor, then bring it up and drink it, and then he would bark.
Right,
that was
he
his
would
thing
bark
on your birthday, yeah.
But that was funny. Like we would be in Scottsdale somewhere, and all of a sudden Tory would start barking, and I've seen him go in a restaurant and start doing push-ups.
Right.
I seen him. There was this one friend of mine. We were at some event, and he had a silk shirt on. And the guy thought he was dressed nice. And whenever Tory would see you, he liked to grab you.
Right.
So he grabbed him by the collar. It's a silk shirt, right? So he balls up the collar, like, come here. I ain't seen you in years. And then he lets go, and the shirt's just ruined. Like, you needed to take it to the cleaners. The guy's like, he's trying to press it out with his hands, and it wouldn't work. But shout out to Tory, man.
Yeah, he's doing pretty good from what I see on Facebook. I think he's in Texas or somewhere right now.
Right. I think he might be in California now. I think they just relocated to California.
Okay. I'll have to look that up. All right, so what's it like being a parent now? Like with everything that we have going on with the age of what kind of advice are you giving your son? Well, he's 10, but
right, he's 10. Just be a kid. Just there's no pressure on him. To really try to force anything. Just be a kid. Just enjoy that childhood. Because I remember being a kid. You were always looking forward to the next year. I need to be older. We used to count like half a years. How old are you? I'm 12 and a half.
Yeah.
13 and a half. And I look back on it, I'm like, I should have just.
I'm not ready for the 50.
Right. I don't want a half of anything. Right. So now it's like. I tell him just to enjoy that moment, because before you know it, it's going to be bills and adult responsibilities and things of that nature. But, try to always keep that youthful spirit of yours. And I think that's kind of what hip hop has allowed us to do, to keep that youthfulness. Even I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and we're talking about politics. And, they talk about Obama, being a black president. But I'm waiting for that hip-hop president, that hip-hop politician. Pac used to always say, I may not change the world, but I'll spark the brain that changes the world. So I think one day we're going to have that kind of leader and that kind of president that we say, this guy's hip-hop.
He'll be rapping at the inauguration.
Like Obama said, I listen to Jay-Z. It seemed all forced. It's like, I don't believe you really, But when you have that one, we'll know. We will know, and I think that'll be that person that probably what this country needs. We need that person that has that hip hop background, that has those experiences that we had probably through the 80s and the 90s,
So I think, speaking of, we were talking about sports earlier before we went on, how much hip hop has influenced sports. Because you remember the little shorts the guys would wear in basketball. Now, you see the long shorts. That's part of hip hop. That came out of the East Coast, I think, wearing them long shorts. Because on the West Coast, it was a cutoff khakis. There, it was the long shorts and those. What are those boots? Timberlands. Yeah. Definitely a difference in that. So you see now, basketball players are rapping. Some of them, they kind of do their own thing. Some of them have music out. It's just really interesting how it affects everything. The culture of everything is in there.
Right, and now the shorts are starting to get shorter.
Yeah, it's going backwards.
It's going back. Yeah, everything's going back. So,
Well, think about this too. We should think only athletes got deals. Now you got rappers who have shoes, clothing. Everything is monetized now. Some brands of BMWs, different cars. Rappers have. So it's really cool to see where the business has went from the start, because I think me and you're both old enough to remember when all of this started, when it was just dudes standing on the corner. You know, to now, it's like these guys are making millions of dollars. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I heard something about, after DMX passed, and I think like Black Rod passed right after that, they're even talking about a pension for hip hop, and I
think that's a great idea.
That lets you know how far it's got, when they're thinking about a pension, retirement for rappers. That's a big deal.
Also insurance too.
Right.
Because they don't have any insurance. Some of those ideas like that just really, but I don't think, if you really think about hip hop, nobody was thinking that far. I mean, you rapped at Battle Dudes. It was about, your neighborhood. It was, my start in hip hop was I used to would sing the message to the guys who were hustling on the corner, and I would put their name in the song. And that's why they used to let me hang around. I was a kid. So I was like, they'd be like, do that song and put my name in it. So we would be doing Kumo D and the message, some of these newer, hip hop, obviously, what's that cut from Rapper's Delight? I used to know that word for word. So I would see these guys hustling, and I would just put their name in it. So they thought I was cool. Like, you can hang out. You can, young kids, occasionally I'd ransom wait for them across the street because nobody was expecting me to be doing that. But it's hip hop has really changed a lot. And where do you see it going from here? We're in the mumble phase. We're in people making money. Where do you see hip hop going now?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to say where it's going. I think one thing that's been consistent about hip hop, there's always been change. Now it seems like we've kind of had this trend, like you do say, the mumble trend, but there's always another generation coming up. There's some youngsters coming up that are going to put their own spin on it. So I think it's going to change in a different way. And maybe it may revert back to, maybe some of the roots. You even see that with other genres of music. You get an artist that kind of taps into more of a retro sound, it's like, okay, but they're kind of taking it back to, more of that older sound. So you could get some of that starting to come up, and we would definitely love to see that, to definitely see that. There are some artists out there. There's this Griselda movement, a guy like Benny the Butcher and Conway. They kind of rap more of like the 90s New York East Coast. So it's more of a throwback, and it's kind of getting more popular and catching steam. So sometimes I would get to the point to be like, okay, I'm done. You always say to yourself, am I done? And there's been a couple times like, man, am I done with the culture? Am I done with it? But then something always pops up that catches my eye, and I'm like, okay, I like this.
Yeah, I definitely, for me, it's the music and then the creativity of the lyrics. And there's some guys that are super talented out there, but I think everything has been dumbed down so much that it takes a little bit away from the culture. But I think it's good also too from a business point of view, because now you can control your own thing, because you would be at the mercy. I think our first record deal, we got hosed on all the money. We were just happy to hear ourselves on the radio. We could care less. But if I would have knew what I knew now, I would have been able to say, wow, we need to make sure we're getting some points on this music. I mean, we had it wasn't a big deal, but it was still, we didn't get any of the money. And that's when they said, well, we paid for the studio, we did this. And we're like, damn,
So I wanted to ask you, what did you think about the Straight Outta Compton movie when it came out? What did you think?
Well, I was excited that they told the story, but there were a lot of exaggerations and things that weren't true. But I was happy because I knew all those guys, so it was good to see all of that. But obviously, it's Hollywood. They got to make a story. They got to make it interesting.
Right.
Some of it was a little overplayed, but it was cool. I liked it. It was interesting. I like how it started. I think Yeller's going to come out with his own version of that story.
And that's what I was thinking, because there's so many people that could tell a version. JJ Fad could tell a version.
Yeah, and they got left
Prince
out.
Could tell a version,
Yeah.
So Alonzo could tell a version. Everybody, lived it. But that's the same thing with anybody. Everybody sees it from their own lens and their own eyes.
Well, you see a lot of guys going on these podcasts, like they'll go on Vlad and they'll tell their version of the story, which I enjoy hearing the different behind the scenes stuff. But I think with podcasts stuff, you can hear just guys that you love tell their story. Like I listened to Melly Mel on Vlad, like he brought a bunch of stuff I didn't know no clue about.
Right.
I didn't realize how much he made from other people sampling the message, which is cool for him, So stuff like that is good for the culture. I like hearing the stories and people behind the scenes. I think that makes for a lot more of a balanced look as far as hip hop and where it's going to go.
Right. And I think sometimes for people in our generation, I think they get upset with some of the younger generation because they don't do the history.
They don't do.
And the history is important, even for somebody like me, when I got into it, I still wanted to know the history. I wanted to be able to be well versed in it. But these younger kids, it just kind of seemed like it's about now, in the moment now. But one day they'll be that person that will want the generation ahead of them to look into the history too.
When I first started listening, like if I'd say the last poets, very few people know who the last poets are, but they're like some of the first rappers.
Right.
But they were political, like super political. This was back in the 60s, so they were talking about, political stuff. And then you get the Melly Mels onto the Public Enemy. Like, I was talking to these kids, and they don't even know who Public Enemy is. They're
right.
like, what? Who's Public Enemy? And but Public Enemy is still touring. They still go around the world touring with band, and I like the Public Enemy. They get with these rock bands and they play rock covers, so they're getting that whole rock crowd and these old hip hop bands. A lot of these hip hoppers are still out making money, going on tour. And
that's the thing. There's the whole vintage aspect. If you have hit records and hit albums, there is an audience and there's money to be made to go out. I saw, speaking of NAU, I saw Chuck D give a lecture at NAU about 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty deep, and he really touched on a gamut of things. He didn't just stick to hip hop, but just to see Chuck D at the university that I attended, was special. I'm like, man, I grew up a block from here bumping Public Enemy, waiting for my dad to get 3 blocks down the street so I could crank them house speakers up loud. He'd be like, did you turn that stereo up?
Seeing Public Enemy with the Beastie Boys. I mean, and people were freaked out because they had the fake Uzis on stage. And
right.
People were like, what the heck is this? And then here come the Beastie Boys, and they got a keg on stage, and it was nuts, man. But I love that stuff. I still play all that old stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was just classic stuff. And then you have your hardcore stuff. Like, do you think now, though, how we always talk about the underground, do you think there's still an underground in hip hop?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely an underground that's out there, but it doesn't get the commercial airplay, so you have to dig, or you have to be that kind of music nerd that is digging and finding stuff like that. But I remember about 10 years ago, Kendrick Lamar was in that underground, and I remember digging and finding him and telling my cousin, I'm like, these dudes are going to be the next big thing. And sure enough, they were. So now you get them on the radio, but that whole little TDE elective with Kendrick, they started out underground and nobody really knew about them. So it's out there, but nowadays as a parent and all the things that we have, I can't be that music nerd to be digging for music 24/7 like I used to. So
do you feel like you're a grumpy hater now?
No, I'm trying not to. I try to fight it. Or if I find myself trending down that path, I take a step back before I just jump out the window and condemn something that I don't like, just because it's not my generation, So I don't ever want to be that dude, because I hated that guy when I was younger. That person that was like, oh, this is just like disco. It's only going to last for a couple years. Or, even when we would be breaking, they were like, oh, this is a little fad. You guys just put your cardboard up. It's just a fad.
Still touring, breaking.
Right, still doing it. And like I said, nobody knew that, it would be something that would make money. I think at one point, I just kind of felt like in some kind of way, no matter what I do, if I'm in corporate America, there's going to be something hip hop. Like I might wear my clothes a certain way that's just going to know it's hip hop, or my hat will be a certain way, So there's always going to be something. But sometimes I get upset because it's really not accepted as you would think. Like if you think about a guy look at your rock dude, he has a leather coat on and, some boots and vintage. He could probably wear that to work and they wouldn't say anything.
Right?
You could get a guy that could come in with some spurs and some chaps and a cowboy hat, and that's more accepted.
Right, that's country.
That's country
guy.
So hip hop, I think it's our culture, and to see it be more accepted even, as we get older and it's part of just normal everyday life. That's what I've tried to do, and you can do both. You can be in a corporate world, you can run your business, and you can still have that hip-hop swag and go along with it just like anyone else, what we mentioned earlier.
Well, a lot has changed, and we're going to watch it keep growing. And as things come up, we'll have to have you back on. Where can people find you if they want to follow you in your journey?
They can catch me on Instagram. If they befriend me on Instagram, it's Pneumonic, PNEUMONIC 25.
What does that stand for?
You remember that movie from the 80s, Johnny Mnemonic? It was kind of cheesy. What's his name? Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
Because my name is John. He used to call me Johnny. So I remember mnemonic. So I was like, and it has to do, I think there's pneumonic plague. It has to affect the breath and the breathing. So I was like, okay, that sounds pretty dope. Breathing, take your breath away. So mnemonic 25 on Instagram. So if you found me there, I'm DJing through the Instagram and playing all kind of hip hop.
Because we saw a lot of that with the pandemic. A lot of DJs were going live on their Facebook or Instagram, getting people going because they couldn't go to the clubs. Do you do any of that?
No, I didn't do any of that, but I followed a lot of it. D-Nice was the one that kind of set that off. And then you even had rappers just throwing shows. I think that's where the Versus kind of birthed out of, giving people something to do during the pandemic. But I try to put a lot of history on my Instagram. In the stories, I'm always any genre, all kind of music. So if you're a music person and you want to get some good music and some stuff that's throwback, vintage, even new stuff, you can catch me on there.
All right, folks. Well, we will be back next week. See you next time on Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence.
Thanks for listening to Fit Over 40 with Coach Clarence. Clarence Ferguson is a seasoned loan officer, fitness expert, personal chef, and entrepreneur who leads a revolution of men and women like you who want to live their best life going into middle age. Join us next time for more inspiring dialogue, challenging topics, and industry leaders offering tips and how-tos to improve your life at fitover40withcoachclarence.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Sunwarrior.com plant-based proteins and superfood supplements. Raise your vibe, your light, energy, and love. Sun Warrior believes the answers for optimal health are found in nature. Our clean, burning sources of plant-based proteins provide essential BCAAs, branched-chain amino acids for muscle growth, pre-tension, and energy. Get the benefits from plant proteins that taste amazing and are 100% vegan. No added sugar, gluten-free, and mixed easily. For nutrition on the go in a shaker and a protein boost to your favorite smoothies, use the code for a discount, Coach Clarence. Go to sunwarrior.com, discount code Coach Clarence.